Colorado Territory, 1878. The wind screamed down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, sharp as a whip and cold enough to sting the skin. Snow clung to the pines in thick patches, but it was not winter yet, just the kind of October that warned what was coming. Aurelia Nash gripped the reins of the bay mare with numb fingers, her skirts torn, boots caked in mud, and her cheeks split from where Henry had struck her that morning. She did not look back. Not once. Behind her lay a cabin near Trinidad and a man whose rage had finally turned deadly. She had nothing except the horse she had stolen, his horse, and the pistol tucked in the folds of her dress. She had not eaten since yesterday morning. Her breath fogged in the air, shallow and fast, but she pressed on, riding higher into the mountains. The trail was rough, barely more than a game path. Her thighs ached from riding, her hands shook, and her heart thudded like a drum. But she was free. She would die free if she had to. She rode until the mare stumbled, nearly going down on a ridge above a narrow valley. Aurelia slid from the saddle, knees buckling. She stood there for a long moment, chest heaving, then limped forward into the trees. She found a rocky overhang, dry beneath, with enough space to crawl under. She dragged a few branches in front of it as a poor excuse for a windbreak, then curled beneath the stone, the pistol clutched against her ribs, and wept into the dirt. Gideon Darnell had not seen a soul in 4 days. He liked it that way. The cabin he built with his own hands stood beside a quiet creek, deep in the wooded folds near the base of Blanca Peak. He hunted, chopped wood, patched his roof when the storms tore at it, and kept to himself. He had his reasons. That morning he was checking his snare lines, rifle slung across his back, when he spotted hoofprints in the mud. A single horse. He knelt, frowning. Too small for a trade group, fresh. Not more than 6 hours old. He followed them without thinking. The tracks led toward the higher ridges, and judging by how close they ran to the drop-offs, whoever rode that horse had been in a panic. Then he found the animal tied to a sapling, lathered in sweat, a little lame in the back leg. No rider. Gideon unlooped the reins and murmured soft words to the mare as he checked her over. Then he spotted the faint trail of bootprints, smaller than his own, heading into the trees. He followed. When he found her, she was unconscious. Curled under a rock ledge, lips cracked, face pale, dress torn and dirt-streaked. She jerked awake when he knelt beside her, eyes wide with terror. Her hand moved fast, grabbing for the pistol. "I am not here to hurt you," Gideon said quickly, holding both hands up. "You are safe. Stay back," she rasped, voice raw. "Where's my horse?" "I got her. She is fine. You need water." "I do not need your help. You are shaking. Your lips are blue." I said, but her voice cracked and her body gave out again. Gideon caught her before she hit the ground. She was light as a sack of flour. He lifted her carefully and carried her back down the trail toward his cabin, her pistol still tucked in her fingers. Aurelia woke on a real bed. She smelled smoke and wood and something warm, stew maybe. Her eyes flew open. She saw logs stacked for walls, a fire burning low, and the cowboy from before sitting at a table nearby, stitching a tear in a shirt. "You are awake," he said. "That is good. You slept near 2 days." She tried to sit up. "Where am I?" "My home. I am Gideon Darnell. I found you in the mountains." "You were half frozen." She scanned the room for her pistol. "It is there," he said, nodding at the table. "Loaded. I did not touch it." Aurelia relaxed a little. She rubbed her arms, then looked at him. His face was lean, sun-darkened, with a thick jaw and soft brown eyes. He looked calm. "Not dangerous. I did not ask you to bring me here." "No, ma'am, you were not in a condition to ask anything." She stared at the fire. "I need to leave soon." "I would not advise it until your strength is back. Snow is coming. You will not get far." She swallowed hard. "I cannot stay." He waited, did not press, She glanced at him again. My husband, he beat me, often. This time I thought he would kill me, so I took his horse and ran. I do not know where I am going. You are in the mountains west of Fort Garland. Near 20 miles from the nearest town. She nodded slowly. I will not go back. Good. His voice was quiet but firm. You should not. Why are you helping me? Gideon looked at her and something flickered in his eyes. Because I would want someone to help my sister if she were out there alone. She blinked fast. You have a sister. Had she died? Long time ago. Aurelia's chest tightened. She looked down at her hands. I had a daughter. Her name was Ruth. She died at birth. After that, Henry changed. Gideon's jaw twitched. I am sorry. They sat in silence for a while. The fire cracked. Aurelia closed her eyes and let the warmth settle into her bones. The next few days passed quietly. Gideon did not ask questions. He brought her food, made her tea, left her space. Aurelia walked a little each day, helped wash dishes, even mended one of his shirts. She found herself watching him, how his hands moved when he chopped wood, how he always looked out the window before stepping outside. He was kind, careful, not like Henry. One night she stood outside the cabin watching the stars. Gideon came up beside her, arms crossed. Snow's coming, he said. She nodded. I should be scared, but I am not. He looked at her. Why not? Because I feel safe here. Gideon's voice was low. You are. She turned toward him. He was close. She could see the faint scar along his temple, the way his eyes searched hers. I never thought I would trust a man again, she said. He did not move, but his voice was steady. I will never give you reason not to. Her breath caught in her throat. She looked down, then smiled, small and real. Thank you. It was on the 7th night that it happened. Snow had begun to fall, and the cabin was warm with firelight. Aurelia was brushing her hair near the hearth. Gideon had just set 2 cups of tea on the table. She turned to him and said softly, You are the first man who has ever looked at me like I matter. He stepped toward her, slow and sure. You do. There was no rush, no desperation. He reached out and touched her cheek, gentle as a breath. I never thought I would feel anything good again, she whispered. You deserve good, he said. Every day of your life. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded, smiling through them. And then he kissed her, and she kissed him back, and everything outside the cabin fell away. For the first time in her life, she felt what it was to be cherished. The wind shifted as November settled in. It howled through the trees some nights, low and mournful, like a voice trying to remember a name. Gideon had patched the chinking between the logs and laid in extra firewood, but the cold still crept under the door and settled in the corners. Aurelia had taken to sewing by the window in the afternoons, her stitches neat and quiet, her eyes often drifting toward the tree line. You always look east, Gideon said one day, setting down the hide he'd brought in. Toward the pass. She didn't look away. It's where I came from. Sometimes I think I hear hoofbeats, but it's just the wind or rabbits. You're safe here. I know, my body believes it. My mind still forgets sometimes. Gideon didn't speak right away. He wiped his hands on a cloth, then reached for the kettle. He poured water into 2 tin cups and handed her one. What would you do, he asked, if you never had to look over your shoulder again? Aurelia held the cup between her palms. I'd plant something, not just flowers, food, beans, potatoes, something that takes tending, he nodded. There's land down by the creek. Come spring, it could hold Rose. She looked at him then, really looked, and he held her gaze without flinching. That night, she found herself listening to the rhythm of his breathing after he'd fallen asleep beside her. It was steady, like the sound of boots on packed earth, like something dependable. She didn't touch him, just lay still with her hand resting near his and let that steadiness quiet the part of her still afraid. The days grew shorter. Snow came in sheets now, not flurries. Gideon showed her how to trap rabbits, how to tell which trees would drop branches first under the weight of snow, how to bank a fire so it wouldn't die in the night. She learned quickly. He never talked over her, never turned her out of the way so he could finish a task himself. He stood beside her, hands calloused and sure, and let her find her own rhythm. One evening after supper, she reached for the broom and caught her wrist on the edge of the table. She winced and dropped it. He was beside her in a moment. "Let me see." "It's nothing. You're bleeding." She let him take her hand. He turned it over gently, his thumb warm against her skin. He cleaned the cut with a rag and wrapped it in linen, his touch careful but not tentative. "You never flinch from pain," he said. "I've had enough of it to know which kind's worth fearing." He looked up at her then, not just with concern, but something deeper, something he hadn't let show before. "I've seen men hurt women and walk away without shame. I've seen women carry those wounds longer than the men who gave them. But I've never seen someone come through the dark like you have," she swallowed. "Maybe I haven't come through it yet. You're standing in the light, that counts." Her throat tightened. She stepped back, blinking fast. "You always say things like that. Like you've been waiting to speak them." "I have." He didn't say more, and she didn't press. But something quiet settled between them then, a space made not of distance but of understanding. The next morning, Gideon rode out to check his traps near the ridge. Aurelia stayed behind to tidy the cabin. She found a tin box tucked behind the stove while sweeping, worn at the edges, the clasp nearly rusted through. Inside was a small stack of folded letters and a photograph, faded and cracked. A girl, maybe 12 years old, with a braid down her back and eyes full of mischief. When Gideon returned, snow crusted on his shoulders, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, the box in her lap. "I didn't mean to pry," she said. "I was cleaning." He closed the door behind him and set his rifle down. "It's all right." "Is she the sister you mentioned?" He nodded and came to sit beside her. "Her name was Clara. She drowned in the Rio Grande." Spring melt came too fast and she tried to cross on foot. Aurelia touched the edge of the photograph. "You still carry her with you?" "I reckon I always will." She looked at him then, her voice barely above a whisper. "I carry Ruth too." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "I want to build something with you, Aurelia, not just survive, not just mend what's broken. Something new." She didn't answer right away, but her hand tightened around his and she leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. They sat like that as the fire burned low, the silence between them no longer empty but full of steady promise. When he rose the next morning, she was already outside, clearing a path in the snow with a branch. She turned when he stepped out, her cheeks pink with cold, eyes bright. "I was thinking," she said, brushing hair from her face. "If there's still flour left, I could try making biscuits today." He nodded. "There is, I'd like that." She smiled, not small this time, and the sun caught the snow behind her like a field of stars. Later that week, as they sat together after supper, Gideon pulled a small pouch from his coat. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a silver ring, plain but strong. "I don't have a preacher," he said, "or a church, but I have land. I have hands that know how to work. And I've got more peace in my heart since I met you than I ever thought I'd earn." She stared at the ring, breath shallow, then met his eyes. "Are you asking me?" He nodded. "I'd like to build a life with you, Aurelia. If you'll have me." She took the ring, turned it over once in her fingers, then slid it on. It fit. "I will." Her voice didn't tremble. "I want to grow old here, with you." He reached across the table and their hands met. No more running, no more fear. Just the quiet beginning of the life they'd both thought they'd lost the right to dream of. By early December, the snow lay thick across the valley, softening every edge, burying the past beneath its clean hush. Chickadees flitted through the bare branches, and smoke curled steady from the chimney. Aurelia had taken to keeping a small pot of dried lavender and pine needles near the stove, the scent warm and sharp in the close air. The cabin no longer felt like a shelter, it felt like a beginning. Gideon stood by the window, trimming a length of rawhide. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low. "Come spring, we ought to ride into San Luis. Have your name written in the ledger, same as mine. Buy seed, maybe a pair of goats if we've enough saved." She glanced up from where she was kneading dough. "And what would we name the place?" He smiled, slow and quiet. "You've got a name for it already, don't you?" "I was thinking Ruth's Hollow. For her and your Clara both. No one else has to know what it means, just us." He nodded once. "That suits." They exchanged no more words on the matter. The dough rose, the fire crackled, and outside the wind shifted through the trees like it was listening. That afternoon, Gideon set out on snowshoes to check the trap line near the southern bluff. Aurelia stayed behind to patch the lining of his coat, using the last of the thick thread from his supply box. She worked by the window for the light, pausing now and then to watch the treetops sway. A crow called once, then again, sounding closer. When Gideon returned near dusk, his shoulders were dusted white but his expression unreadable. "There's tracks," he said, unwrapping his scarf. "Fresh. 2 horses, both shod. Could be a pair passing through, or could be something else." Her hands went still on the stitching. "Coming from the west," he nodded. "Didn't follow them far. No sign they're close, but I'll keep watch tonight." She stood, crossing to the woodpile beside the hearth. "I'll take the first half." "You need rest too." "You sure?" "I didn't survive this long to start hiding behind someone." He didn't argue. He never did when she spoke like that. That night, she sat near the door with the rifle across her lap, wrapped in a quilt Gideon's mother had sewn before she passed. The moon lit the snow in a pale blue wash, and every creak of the wood made her spine go taut. But nothing came. Just wind, and the slow, steady rhythm of a world still turning. By dawn, Gideon took her place without a word, and she curled into the bed, the place beside her still warm from where he'd slept. 2 days passed without sign of the riders. The tension eased, but didn't vanish. Gideon built a second latch on the door and moved the axe closer to the hearth. Aurelia didn't question it. One morning she found him smoothing a sheet of paper on the table, a lead pencil in hand. "What's that?" she asked. "Ledger from the old days. I used to keep account of every animal I brought in. Thought I'd start again. This time for both of us." He wrote her name slowly just above his own. Aurelia Darnell. She watched the letters take shape, her throat catching unexpectedly. "Never thought I'd see that name written beside mine. You earned it." He folded the page and slid it into a leather pouch, setting it inside the cupboard. "We'll take it with us come spring." That night they laid quiet beneath the patchwork quilt. Aurelia turned toward him in the dark. "What if they were looking for me? The riders?" Gideon didn't hesitate. "Then they'll find a man standing in front of you." She reached for his hand beneath the covers. "I never asked you what you lost before you came here." He was quiet a moment. "A war, a family. A piece of myself I thought I'd never get back. And now, I've got something worth staying for." She pressed her forehead to his chest, listening to the slow beat of his heart. "So do I." The snow deepened and the days shortened. Gideon carved new handles for the kitchen knives, and Aurelia began sketching rows in a notebook he'd given her, planning where to plant beans, onions, squash. They spoke of building a smokehouse in the summer, of trading with the settlers who passed through toward the Rio Grande. One morning, she woke to a robin tapping against the windowpane. Gideon was already outside, splitting wood. She stepped into her boots and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before joining him. "I want to ask something," she said, brushing a flake of ice from her sleeve. Not about the past. About now. He leaned on the axe handle. Ask, if we go into town and someone asks how we met, what will you say? He looked up at her, eyes steady. I'll say I was alone, and then I wasn't, she nodded. That's enough. They stood in the stillness, breath pluming in the cold, the sound of the axe striking wood the only answer needed. By the time the first thaw came, the path to the creek was clear. They walked it together, boots sinking into the softening ground. At the bend where the pines opened wide, Aurelia pointed to a patch of earth just beginning to show green. Here, she said. First row. Gideon knelt and ran his fingers through the soil. It's ready. So am I. He stood and took her hand, and together they looked out across the field, the sun lifting over the ridge and spilling gold across the hollow that would carry their names, their work, and the quiet, resolute love that had grown slow and steady through the longest winter. Their old lives had ended without ceremony. But this was the beginning. By late March, the last of the snow had retreated from the valley floor, leaving behind soft ground and the scent of thawing pine. The creek ran full now, noisy with meltwater, and the air held the kind of chill that warned not to pack away the winter coats just yet. But the days were longer. The light stayed after supper, and with it came the feeling that the land was stretching awake. Aurelia knelt by the garden plot in a worn apron, sleeves rolled past her elbows, a satchel of seed packets beside her. She pressed her fingers into the soil, feeling the looseness, the richness of it from the ash Gideon had mixed in weeks before. He stood a few yards off, splitting cedar logs for fence posts, his hat low against the sun and a strip of cloth tied around his wrist where he'd nicked it with the drawknife. You ever think about building a smokehouse? She asked, not looking up. Been thinking about it since I dried meat over a fire and it came out tasting like soot and regret. She smiled. We'll need it if the rabbits keep coming like they are. We'll need more than that if you keep feeding the strays. They're hungry. They'll start thinking this is their land, not ours. She turned her head, squinting at the tree line where a pair of ears twitched in the underbrush. Maybe it's both. He leaned on the post and watched her for a long moment. You know, I never thought I'd be talking about rabbits and smokehouses with a woman who once aimed a pistol at my chest. You startled me. You were ready to shoot. I'd do it again. He gave a short nod. I believe that. She rose, brushing dirt from her palms. Her skirt was damp at the knees and a pine needle clung to the hem. There's a peddler's wagon up in Fort Garland. I heard he trades for cloth and spices. I was thinking if we ride in after the last frost, I could try my hand at pickling. Gideon reached for his canteen, unscrewed the cap, and took a long drink before answering. I'll ride in with you. I can go alone. I know. But I'd rather not let you out of my sight that long. She tilted her head slightly. You afraid I'll run? No, I'm afraid someone else might try and take what's mine. She stepped toward him, slow, her boots pressing soft prints into the thawed earth. You don't have to guard me, Gideon. I'm not a thing to steal. I know that, but I also know what men are capable of when they see something they want. She stopped in front of him. And what are you capable of? It wasn't a challenge. It was a question she already knew the answer to. He set down the post. Building, protecting. Staying. She touched the cloth around his wrist, fingers light over the knot. I've never had someone stay. You do now. She didn't reply, just stood there as the breeze lifted the edge of her hair and the sound of the creek filled the space between them. Later that evening, she brought out a bundle of wool she'd been keeping in a cedar chest. Not dyed, not spun yet, but clean and soft. She laid it out on the table and set a small jar of lye soap beside it. I want to make something, she said. Not for trade. Just for us. He looked at the wool, then at her. A blanket, A cradle quilt. He was quiet, not startled, just still. She didn't fill the silence. Let him take it in. Are you sure? He asked finally. I am. He reached for the wool, rubbed a corner between his fingers. We'll need more hands come next spring. I've got two. You've got two. That makes four. He laughed then, low and warm. That's enough to start. They spent the next day clearing the far side of the hollow, digging post holes and tying twine where the first line of fencing would go. She worked beside him without complaint, her back aching by sundown but her hands steady on the mallet. By dusk, they'd laid in 12 posts and staked out the spot for a henhouse. That night, they ate cornbread and broth by candlelight. She leaned her shoulder against his at the table. Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't come through that ridge? I think about it more than I'd admit. And I'd still be building fences, still hunting, but I wouldn't be living. She reached for his hand and set it against her middle. You are now. He didn't speak, just held his palm there, his thumb brushing the fabric of her dress where it stretched ever so slightly tighter than it had weeks before. The wind outside had calmed. The fire burned low. And inside that cabin, something lasting had taken root, quiet, sturdy, and deep as the land itself. By late April, the mountain air had softened enough to carry the scent of wet bark and thawed moss. The path to the creek no longer crunched underfoot but gave slightly, rich with spring. Gideon's hands had healed where the blade slipped weeks before, though the scar beneath the linen wrap still pulled when he braced against the shovel. Aurelia stood knee-deep in the field behind the cabin, marking rows with a pine rod. Her hair was braided back, tucked beneath a kerchief to keep the wind from teasing it loose. She paused to listen for the birds. The redstarts had returned 2 days ago, but her mind was turned toward the root cellar. Gideon had begun digging near the rear slope. She caught sight of him bent low, shoulders squared, working the spade in a rhythm that matched the pull of her own thoughts. I've been thinking about the ledger, she said, stepping toward him with her palms on her lower back. He looked up, squinting against the sun. What about it? There's space near the back, blank pages. I'd like to start recording what we grow, what we trade, what we give away, planning ahead. No, building something with shape. If we're going to raise a child here, I want there to be a record of how we began. So nothing is forgotten. He nodded once, pushed the spade into the dirt. You'll write it better than I would. She smiled but didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the edge of the field where a small patch of wild onion had begun to spread. She knelt, loosened a cluster from the soil, and brushed it clean on her apron. She would dry the tops for soup, slice the bulbs for the pan. Inside the cabin that evening, Gideon carved a cradle rail with slow, careful strokes. His thumb followed the grain as he worked, smoothing the edges. Aurelia sat nearby, turning the pages of an old almanac left behind by the trapper who'd once passed through the valley. She traced the planting chart with her fingertip, measuring against the weather. They'd kept notes on each morning. You ever think about taking on someone to help? She asked, not looking up. He paused the blade mid-curve. You mean a hired man? Not full-time. Just someone come late summer. If the baby arrives early, I won't manage the harvest alone. He considered that. There's a widow near San Pablo. Her son's near grown. I've traded eggs with her before, might ask. If he's willing to work for bread and a blanket, we can offer that. We'll have more than bread by then. She glanced up. That's the hope. They didn't speak of the child often, not in specifics. But the quiet preparations had crept in steadily: the cradle rail, the planting rows, the careful tucking away of flour sacks for swaddling. That night, the wind came in strong from the east. Not harsh, but insistent, like something shifting in the hills. Aurelia lay beside him, her head resting just beneath his collarbone, and listened to the beams creak. I wrote Clara's name in the ledger, she said into the dark. He ran his fingers along her spine. Why? So she's part of it. So our child knows she existed. That she mattered. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, thank you. There's space for Ruth too, not just her name. A page. He kissed the top of her head. Then we'll write it together. In early May, they rode into San Luis. The trip took the better part of a day, with Aurelia padded in blankets and riding side saddle on Gideon's mare. They traded eggs and dried mushrooms for cloth, seed potatoes, and a small hand mirror with a chipped corner. Gideon brought back a bar of soap wrapped in wax paper and a bag of coarse salt. They stopped by the land office before riding home. The clerk, a man with a crooked jaw and tobacco-stained fingers, raised a brow when Gideon handed over the ledger. "Yours and hers?" the man asked. "Yes," Gideon said. "Joint deed. Homestead established West Ridge of Blanca Peak under the name Darnell." The man dipped his pen in ink, scrawled a note, and stamped the page with a heavy hand. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Darnell." They rode home under a sky the color of faded denim, the wind carrying the promise of rain. Late that summer, under a cottonwood tree just beyond the cabin, Aurelia gave birth to a daughter. The labor was long but steady, and Gideon stayed beside her the whole time, his hand never leaving hers. When the child let out her first cry, Aurelia wept not from pain, but from something older, something that had lived quiet and buried inside her for years. They named her Clara Ruth. The boy from San Pablo arrived 2 weeks later, quiet and strong-backed, and helped Gideon bring in the last of the beans and lentils. Aurelia spent her days on the porch with the baby, humming soft songs she half remembered from her childhood, while Gideon mended fence lines and split kindling in the yard. By the time autumn came, the garden was turned and the cellar full. The quilt Aurelia had sewn lay across the cradle, stitched with wild onion blossoms and pine branches, small and simple, but made by her own hand. One evening, as the trees turned gold and the air grew sharp again, Gideon sat on the porch with the baby tucked against his chest. Aurelia leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching them both. "She has your eyes," Gideon said. "She has your patience." He looked down at the child, who blinked up at him with a solemn expression. "I never thought I'd live a life like this." "I did," Aurelia said. "The moment I saw you carve that first fence post, I did." He looked at her then, and she came to sit beside him. He leaned into her shoulder, and for a long time they sat in silence, the sun setting slow behind the mountains, the wind moving gently through the tall grass, and the world finally quiet enough to belong to them. Their home held no grand sign, no gate, no road. But it was theirs, built from earth and loss, and the kind of love that grows slow and deep, like roots that hold fast through every storm, and they never left it. Not once. Not for fear or money or change. Because they had already found everything they needed in each other, and that hollow in the mountains had become not just a refuge, but a life.